Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdletes podcast. I'm Jesse, and today we are going to be looking at the latest MCU movie, Black Widow. So this is going to be a review and kind of overall just talking about it, so there will be spoilers for the movie. It is a spoiler review, so if you haven't seen it, then take that into consideration. So this is Black Widow, the first movie to come out in Phase 4. Now, obviously, we've had the MCU has released the Disney Plus series, and that will be something of a discussion for another time, another segment, where I'll be talking about the Disney Plus series and how they've fared so far. But this is the first movie to kick off Phase 4. Now, obviously, 2020 was a mess, and everything was delayed and pushed back, and Black Widow was supposed to be released in May of 2020. And yet, here we are in July of 2021, and it's just now coming out. So this movie has had a lot of marketing, it's had a lot of time in between when they released their first trailers and stuff like that. So it's been kind of sitting in just sitting there waiting so it could be released. And for people like me, that actually hurt the film, because obviously, if it had come out, everything was normal, and it had come out at the regular time, I probably would have had a little bit higher expectations or excitement for this movie, but being that it was so dragged on and it kept getting pushed back, at least for me personally, that made it so that it was kind of less exciting for me, heading into it compared to some other movies. Also, with the fact that I'm not extremely happy with the direction the MCU has proven that they're going to be heading in, and the comments made by people in charge, the Kevin Feige's and others at the top of Marvel Studios, have not made me feel any better about that. It was showing what they're really going to be pushing and how they're not going to push for good stories, but more of just checking these boxes off to make sure that they have the right amount of diversity and different things like that, more so than making a really good story that's true to the source material. And what even was a little bit upsetting was when, I believe it's Victoria Alonso, said that they stick to the comics. They always based on the comics, they're always comic accurate, and even the best MCU movies are not always comic accurate. So they're definitely, and the further we've gone along in the MCU, the more has steered away from being comic accurate and true to the source material and the characters and such. But looking at the first movie that we've had, Black Widow, how did it hold up? Well, just a general overview. So this movie takes place in the gap between Civil War and Infinity War. So this is after the Avengers are split up. Iron Man has, in his registration or pro-Soviet Accords side, have locked up people like Ant-Man, Falcon, Hawkeye. They're all locked up. Cap's on the run, and Black Widow, who was originally part of Iron Man's side, defected and helped Captain America escape, and so therefore she is on the run. And that's kind of how we start off the movie, so that this is taking place all before we know she's going to eventually die in Endgame. So right off the bat, it automatically takes away any kind of dread or suspense from the character. Now obviously we usually don't assume that our characters are going to die because we know they're going to make more movies. But having a movie like this where you already know the characters, what's going to happen afterwards, it sometimes makes it so that there's not as much, the stakes aren't as high. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be a good movie, even though it's a prequel. Now, a lot of people have suggested maybe they had made this movie more about the time in Budapest with Hawkeye and how they Black Widow defected to S.H.I.E.L.D., but this takes place after the fact, so this is going to be kind of revolving around her history with the Red Room and her family, in quotes. So this goes with Black Widow along with Elena Bilova, which is in the comics another Black Widow from the Red Room, who is her sister, or at least part of the role they played, and her parents, which is Red Guardian and Iron Maiden from the comics, or Alexei and Melina. So just kind of let's start and look at the basics of the overall gist of how I thought of the movie. So generally, the movie had I thought the first thing I noticed, it had pretty decent action, and some fight scenes were pretty cool. So there were some different fights, between like Taskmaster and Black Widow and different characters that were pretty decent, or when the Black Widows were faced off in the beginning. So there was some good action, but it wasn't like a super big highlight of the movie, despite being kind of Black Widow's thing. Another thing that kind of drew away from things was the humor kind of overshadowing the kind of opportunities to be more of a serious dramatic moments. Like, so a good example, is like when in the scene where Elena has just basically told her family that everything, even though they were just on a mission, for the Soviet Union and everything, that it was real for her, even though it was just an act, that it was all real. They were her family. That was like the closest thing she'd had to a family, and basically they all just blew it off, at least to her face, whether they thought it or not, like Natasha, that was just, it wasn't the real to them. So that's basically, she was mad and upset that they felt that way. And so Alexei goes off, and this would have been a really good moment to kind of have them bond and connect and have this kind of serious father-daughter thing, and then they kind of made it a little silly. It did do alright, but then, so it kind of, things like that throughout the movie kind of detracted from these moments that could have been a little more impactful if they didn't kind of try to eke the humor in, like Marvel has done a lot in recent movies. So, looking specifically at some characters at the movie, we'll first start with obviously the title character, Black Widow. So Black Widow's been around in the MCU for a while. She's been in Iron Man, Avengers, Captain America. She's been in a lot of movies throughout the years. But this is her first solo movie. A lot of people said it's well past due, and that it should have been back in like Phase 2, put in after Avengers, or maybe after when it actually happened after Civil War, so this wasn't technically a prequel maybe. But anyway, she has finally got her own movie. Was it worth it? Well, we'll see. But, so basically Black Widow's character, just from the outset, the first thing that I noticed is that she's just very worn out and dreary, defeated looking, and, just like, so, that's definitely what the character is going through a lot, in the movie, but I just feel like they didn't really try to make Black Widow look very Black Widow-ish. And it kind of goes back to the fact that they stated, complaining about some of her older appearances and saying that, they wanted to divert the male gaze so she couldn't, like, look, like, she was, attractive or anything. So they looked like they went really out of their way to, like, try to, like, dial that back. And it really just came across as her looking very, older and worn down, and granted that does kind of fit the movie, but they could have tried a little bit more and made her a little more, vibrant, and just like she cared more. She had a very, like, a scowl and things throughout the movie, and she just, didn't really seem like she always wanted to be there, she's just doing it. And so it kind of, something that drew you out a little bit, that you noticed, like, it wasn't just, it was throughout the movie, there were some different scenes like that, they kind of just drew you out. It's like, really? It just didn't seem like she tried that much. But overall, like I said, she had some good action scenes, and really the first part of the movie was probably the better part of the movie. There was just a little more interesting, just going through, following Natasha as she goes through these different places, escaping General Ross and the government, and then kind of traveling about, going off into the middle of nowhere. Then the scene with Taskmaster was actually a cooler scene, when she's on the bridge with Taskmaster. So there was some good scenes at the beginning. I believe, like, kind of at the end, parts were a little bit dragged out, and we'll go into a little bit more of that later, but so that really didn't help, with some of the scenes that Black Widow was actually in. She just felt like it just wasn't quite the send-off that a character of that big of significance in this universe, despite not being quite as prominent in the comics, but at least in the MCU being as prominent a character as she is, that she didn't quite get the send-off I think that it could have been. But ultimately, Black Widow, it wasn't quite her best showing, honestly. Some of the Avengers movies and or Captain America's and stuff really kind of showed a more detail and growth in the character. And there were some things that just didn't feel very Black Widow, like the fact that during the prison scene that she basically, kind of just nonchalantly let all those people die in the prison or get trapped and buried alive, whatever exactly happened. We don't know because they didn't tell us. But basically that avalanche covered the entire prison, so anyone who was outside were probably dead, and anyone who got inside is probably now trapped under who knows how much snow. And we don't have any idea if they got out. They just kill each other. All the prisoners are there, the guards, and whether their guards are innocent or not. And even the prisoners, regardless of what you would think about what they did, she just kind of let them all die. So that was kind of like little things like that just they glossed over, that I feel like Black Widow would have at least acknowledged or maybe been against, but didn't really show in her character in this movie. Let's move on to another main character which they introduced is Elena Bilova, which is the new Black Widow, or the one that they're essentially trying to kind of pass the torch to now that Natasha is dead. And so she was part of the Red Room. She was her sister, and she was, different, obviously, than Natasha. She was, she's younger. She's been through different experiences. She was trained a little different in the Red Room. Like Natasha was a little more psychologically messed with, and then Elena's character was more actually physically tweaked in her brain to actually, as we find out, have them mind controlled, which then eventually she's really not mind controlled but for 2 minutes, maybe not even that long in the movie, before the magic unmind control gas that they have, because the movies she breaks and she is finally freed, and she goes to send stuff to Natasha, who has not looked in on this person who, as we see in the beginning of the movie, cared about. She was really distraught trying to protect her sister. But then after everything that happens, she just kind of abandons her, goes off in her own way, and never really seems to care that her sister was out there all this time. And so it seems like, Elena definitely has reason to be a little upset with her family for kind of just abandoning her. And, obviously Natasha was going through her own things, but figured once she was off on her own and free, maybe when she was with S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Avengers, that she could have gone back to find her and maybe help her out. But she apparently thought that the Red Room was destroyed because she thought Dreykov was dead, and maybe that's why, but she still had no idea where her sister was and didn't really seem to even try to look for her. But honestly, they tried to make her, she kind of quippy, trying to make these, jokes and, be kind of a little, not quite comedic relief, but she had this quips, like the pose, she's a poser, doing stuff. And so she got some lines like that, and she got some decent action scenes. It's kind of a little odd, she seems very small and short, and so it seemed kind of odd, compared to some of these other people that she's fighting. It just seemed like an odd, maybe they could have gotten a little bit bigger built person, but her acting seemed to be decent. So she could be, a decent character moving forward. I don't think she would be a character that you'd want to headline a movie. I think she could work in a group, and as we see in the post-credit scene, it looks like they're going to be forming some kind of Thunderbolts or possibly Dark Avengers of some kind that we've kind of seen collecting, as we got in Falcon and Winter Soldier with U.S. Agent John Walker. And now Elena is tied into that, and she's already connected, so I don't know if maybe they already kind of built this squad, and then we're going to eventually see that, kind of come to fruition later on in a movie or a TV show. So that seems more like, I don't think, obviously the MCU could go this way, but I don't think Elena would be, an Avenger, because she's never really been a precedence of being an Avenger. That doesn't mean she won't, because obviously, they might want a Black Widow on the team. I don't know. And she hasn't officially taken up the Black Widow mantle, so we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Now, based on their comic book origin, it's obviously different. They're not sisters in the comic, or, sisters in the comic. She is another person who went to the Red Room and is really more of a rival of Black Widow. She's someone who sees Black Widow as this, Black Widow's like the best of the Red Room, like she's like one of the best, and that was like her thing. And then Elena is kind of close to being on par with her, but that she's still kind of in the shadow of Natasha. But she's also a lot more violent and dangerous in the fact that she'll, kill and be that kind of violent person that Natasha's kind of reeled back in. Not to say that she won't be violent or kill sometimes, but obviously not to the extent that Elena will. And so it's a very different dynamic. She's more of a bad guy in the comic. Obviously, there's maybe in the newer comics, I haven't read the new, like in the past few years, Black Widow. I've read mostly the older Black Widows from the early 2000s, like the Marvel Knights and stuff, where Elena was very prominent in some of the middle 2000s runs. So that's really kind of where you get her introduction and where her character's about. So obviously in newer comics, they obviously write these comics a lot of the times to be in the movies, when they really shouldn't be doing that way. But so it's very possible that they have written her into being a more anti-hero, so she can kind of fill the role in the movies with some sort of precedence, so to speak, even though it's just something that happened in the comics like the year before or something. So then moving on to another character who, a fairly important character in Black Widow lore, in Black Widow lore especially, is Red Guardian, or Alexei. Now, very different from her comic book, we have Alexei, who in this movie is portraying her father figure, whereas in the comic, Alexei, the Red Guardian, is actually her ex-husband, someone she was married to, and he's basically the Soviet Union's Captain America. Like he's has a version of the super soldier serum, which we do see some in the movie. They don't really explain it too much how that all happened. How did they get a super soldier serum? Is it the same one that Captain America had? We don't know these things. It's not really explained in the movie, but he's basically, that's a good description. He sees Captain America's, the Soviet Union's version of Captain America. And even talks about Captain America a lot in the movie, like they have some kind of history meeting, which in the movies I don't know when that would happen, and I know it's kind of played off as like, a joke, like he's even mentioned in the prison's like, well, he was still in ice then. So we don't know if if he really was thinking that he had some kind of interaction, or if he's just saying it for stories. I don't know. But this is really a character that is played as the comedic relief, and they really don't take Red Guardian very seriously, which is kind of depressing and sad from the fact that he could have been a good character. But he's also like the only really main male character in this movie, and he is treated, as this joke and a goofball. He doesn't have any really serious scene. All of the ones that could have been serious between him and, the Black Widows, it was very, they turned it into a joke, and they made him a joke. Like at the beginning of the movie, they showed that he could be, he's very different in the beginning of the movie. He's really seemed like he cared, and he was more serious, but then after it goes on, he's just a goofball. And what really highlights this is during the end of the movie, when he gets to fight Taskmaster. And this could really have been a chance, like, I'm not saying that he had to have beaten Taskmaster or anything, but they basically just make it so Taskmaster kicks the crap out of him. And Milana has to come in and save him so they can shut the door and lock him in the cell. But, the Red Guardian, even being a little bit out of shape as he was, should have been able to hold his own for a while against him. And they didn't even really show much of the fight. Like, there was a section that they cut away after they started fighting that maybe he could have gotten some blows in to show him just to be a little bit more of a strong character than they did, instead of making him just get absolutely destroyed. So, they still, made him a little bit better towards the end. He kind of ended up saving and staying with them and going off with the rest of the Black Widows and everything, I guess. But it was really kind of a disappointment to see how they was treated. He's obviously not anywhere near a household name, but as reading some of his stuff back in the early Avengers and how he's connected to Black Widow's history seems like kind of a wasted opportunity. Then we have Melina, who was the mother figure. Now, in the comic book, she is actually a version of a character called Iron Maiden. Now, I'm not entirely sure I'm quite familiar with her comic book counterpart, so I can't really speak to accuracy in that area. But just as far as movies go, they show at the beginning, she's like Red Guardian. She seems like a caring mother figure that just kind of turns towards the end of the movie and makes it so that she is like, she just doesn't care anymore. Like, it was all fake, and then even though they showed what looked like real emotions at the beginning, that it's all been twisted and turned. And so, I mean, there's little bits like she showed they saved the photo album that Natasha wanted to bring when they were kids, so she's, even though it was all fake photo album, so it shows, like, it tries to build, like, there is some sentimentality to her, but it doesn't really show, especially with the fact that she basically was the one who put both of her daughters through the Red Room. Like, we put through her daughters and all these other women through this process of the Red Room, even though she might not have physically been the one to do it to them. She's the one that created the technology, the mind control, and different things that affected her daughters, and really showed no remorse for that, and never really is addressed at the fact that she was behind a lot of that. Even though she may not have been the head, she was the lead scientist. She came up with this technology and then was basically let off the hook, never, really, facing any consequences for the really horrible acts that she helped commit as being part of the Red Room. So, I mean, sure, she kind of switches at the last minute and she helps them stop, but I mean, it doesn't seem like, that she was ever, justifiably criticized or held responsible for these actions that she'd committed. And it was never really touched upon, and they kind of made her, be a person that kind of helped them win all this, and maybe that kind of overshadowed it. But it was definitely something that they glossed over that probably shouldn't have been. Now, looking at the, who's portrayed as the villains, we start off with Dreykov, which is kind of like the general guy that is in charge of the Red Room, and who Natasha had supposedly killed in Budapest with Hawkeye, and we even see a quick little flashback of that. So all this time she's thought he's dead, and the Red Room has been destroyed, but in truth it has still been going on. There's still Black Widows out there in all these different places spread out throughout the world, and he's still in charge of it all. And it's just, honestly, he's not, he's not really a good villain. Marvel's has had some villain problems in all their movies at some points, and he is just not a good villain. They try to make him, he's this mean, horrible man who's exploited all these women, and so yes, he's the bad guy, but they just don't really give him anything. He doesn't get much time in it. He's just, he's the bad guy. And, he gets this, big long kind of scene with Natasha at the end, and it just really drags on. It's really kind of like a lull, and it's not really good when he's doing all this back and forth with Natasha, and then he's got this pheromone that stops them, so she has to break her nose so she can't smell it. But before, he's sitting there punching her and, doing all these monologuing, and it's just really not really well written with him, and he just dies in the fire, the glasses fly off and all this stuff. He's really an underwhelming character, and, we don't really feel threat to him at all. He's just kind of there, and he's the one that's in charge, but you don't ever feel like he's the one, like, orchestrating it. You don't feel like he's a threat. You don't feel like some shows, like, good example, in Daredevil, the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, you feel his presence, he's there, you feel these, the pressure and the weight of his actions on all the characters, you feel the helplessness from what's going on in the show that's all being kind of related to him. You don't feel that with him. You know that he's done these horrific things, and he's in charge of it, but you don't feel that he's this threat. He's just a bad guy, like, he's just, a bad guy, like, just a jerk, kind of horrible person kind of guy, but you don't feel that kind of sense of him. So it's really kind of just and, so he dies and the Red Room's destroyed, but he's just really kind of oh yeah, he was a bad guy. It wasn't really a good portrayal of this character. Which leads us to the other supposed villain, who was surprisingly not used a lot. It was Taskmaster. And Taskmaster is a fairly well-known comic in the comics. Obviously, it's a little bit different situation, and so, as we mentioned the spoilers, so we know that Taskmaster is appearing to be a man, talked about as a man, but is obviously a woman. Now, I believe this is supposed to be a big reveal, but I know me and a lot of other people had speculated and thought that it was actually going to end up being a woman, and we were right. So, it wasn't like it was like, oh my gosh, it was a woman. It's like, oh, really? We were right. So, it's like, whatever. Obviously, he's not in the comics. It's a man. It was another gender swapped character. And, the Taskmaster suit was okay. It was an okay suit. I kind of like the more scully, real skull look of the comic book character. And so it was different power set in the sense that, like, her character had like a chip that was placed in her head that helped kind of, after her accident where she was collateral damage in the Dreykov incident, even though he was perfectly fine and unscarred, but his daughter got her face all scarred and messed up, and she experimented on her, and so she was Taskmaster. And so it was really kind of underwhelming, her whole thing at the end. Now, granted, the very first scene on the bridge was a really good scene with Taskmaster. You really felt the dread a little bit. Like when she jumps off of the truck, and you hear the thud and the heavy walking, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this seems like a serious bad guy. So you really feel it, and then there's a good fight, and then that first scene, and you really feel it, and I liked that part. And even in the part where he's chasing Elena and Natasha later on in the movie, so those stuff were really good, and I think they were well handled. I would have liked to have been more like the comics, obviously, but talking, the character never spoke a word. I don't think till the end, and they'd used the magic unmind control dust on them too. So at the end, I think she said something, but really no words to the whole movie or in the mask. I guess to hide the fact that it was a woman, they didn't want to spoil that. Now, granted, it's been revealed, and you can see that there was actually a guy playing Taskmaster in the suit, and he was a bigger, bulkier guy, and then, you've seen some people, they've shown the differences of, when they show her, she's, the shoulders are smaller and a little skinnier, and then the guy's bigger and bulkier, broader shoulders and all that stuff. So you can definitely tell the difference, that most of the time it was actually a guy in the suit, and basically just for the real that they switch it so they could have the woman in the suit. And I'm like, because they were going so hard to try to make it, you think it was a man, to try, had this big shock, when really at this point Marvel doing thing like that is just not a surprise. So it really was kind of, oh, where really? Saw that coming. So Taskmaster had some good opening and potential, but really it felt like a wasted Taskmaster, and because of the way it ended, I don't think we're going to get a Taskmaster unless another Taskmaster comes along, but she's cleared and with the rest of the Black Widows to start their new lives or whatever exactly they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to tie into any of those characters or if any of those characters will come back in. I don't feel like with Black Widow out of the picture that any of them besides Elena would have a reason to come back in, but maybe they will. So we're probably not going to get a Taskmaster in anything else, so which is kind of disappointing because it'd been a cool villain to see on the screen again. So overall, looking at the movie, was it horrible? No, I don't think it was a horrible movie by any means. I guess generally most MCU movies I've enjoyed. I guess even Captain Marvel, there were parts. Captain Marvel and The Dark World are kind of at the bottom of, my list of things. Now, Black Widow, is it a great movie? No, but it's a little better. It's a little more fun and better than I guess I thought, because I really honestly came in with absolutely no expectations. I've dropped my bar very, very low, so even movies that are kind of average would probably be a little bit better than what I'm honestly thinking they're going to be. I really want Marvel to surprise me with how they do things, but they haven't yet, so maybe that'll change. It's just hard because we could really be getting some good movies, but just the quality seems to be going down since after Endgame, and it's a lot of wasted potential of what these shows and movies could have been. Like, a Black Widow movie could have been really cool. There's a couple different routes they could have taken. They could have taken, the flashback of, her and Hawkeye, how they met in Budapest, and, showing her kind of defecting and becoming part of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all that stuff. That could have been an interesting story. Still utilizing Taskmaster as a villain, and, the Dreykov and these other characters, you could have still incorporated them into it, but done it a little bit earlier in her career. Or you could have done it as a more comic book style spy assassin type of movie that they looked like they wanted to do at first, but they didn't really follow through with that. And, just looking at some of the comics, runs that she was in, there's a lot of, like most characters, stuff to draw from, and so it feels like this could have definitely been a lot better than it was. So I won't go out of the way to say it's a horrible or a bad movie, but it's just an average movie. And it's not really that much different than I expected. It's actually slightly more enjoyable than I expected. So basically the first part of the movie is a little bit better than the last part. It just kind of drags on, like I mentioned, with the scene with Natasha and Dreykov. It's just like, oh, come on. They make, Alexei seem like a doof. And, Melina and Elena are off doing their thing. Nothing's really exciting or climactic about the end. It shouldn't be even the falling. You feel no sense of, like, dread, because she's gonna die later, so she's not gonna die now. And I'm also disappointed not to get to see. I was thinking there might be a cameo from, like, an Iron Man or Cap. I know the actors might not be up to doing those things, but I thought that I'd heard or speculated that maybe there would be one of those people, but they weren't. So it kind of leads into Infinity War, so it kind of shows basically that gap that happened in there. But ultimately, slightly disappointing, but, it's not a horrible movie, so that's it for Black Widow. She's out. She's dead. I don't think they're going to bring her back for anything. Like, you speculate and think that maybe characters like Iron Man or Cap might eventually come back, but I'm pretty sure Black Widow is gone. So, Elena will be the closest thing we get to a Black Widow. I don't know how exactly they're going to go about that, and if they're going to make her officially Black Widow, if she's going to be an Avenger, or if she's going to stick to more of or comic book roots and be more like a Thunderbolt and part of this Valentina's team, which I assume is like a Thunderbolt type team, but we'll see how that turns out. I don't know if any of these other characters are going to show up again. And I honestly don't care if they do, because I don't feel like they would fit. Like a Red Guardian, if done properly, could be introduced into something else, but like I said, with Black Widow being out of it, I don't feel like the connection would work in anything else. So, and Taskmaster's gone, and even though he could be villain in a lot of characters' stuff, but like I said, maybe they'll bring along another character to play the mantle of Taskmaster, maybe the real Taskmaster from the comics, Tony Masters, but don't really know. So another MCU event has come and gone. So we've gotten a few shows and a movie. So 3 more movies left: Shang-Chi, Eternals, and Spider-Man. So we'll see if the year continues to go up or down with those movies, but ultimately Black Widow was, about what people like me expected, which was very average. Like I said, I won't go as far as to say it was horrible, but definitely not one of the greats. And not really the best send-off for a prominent character in the MCU. So not many characters have gotten super great send-offs. Iron Man was decent, and Iron Cap, despite the fact that he got a nice ending, not very a Cap-like thing, the ways things were handled, We won't go into that now. So, they're getting rid of a lot of the OG characters. We knew that would happen eventually. Don't really know what that means for the MCU. Not a lot of super hope. Wish things are they stick more to the comics, but as we can tell from what they said and what they've seen, they're definitely drifting away from that. And so while Black Widow wasn't super drifting away, but it definitely wasn't comic accurate either. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Tell me what you thought about Black Widow. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Does this make you excited for the future of the MCU? Are you looking forward to Thurston Music this year? Do you care to see Elena and the other characters again? And if so, how and where? Let me know in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys next time.